place was all about visit demand that's part of vineyard. And so people, you know, who possibly haven't been hitherto involved in viticulture in particular, and they might come and say, well, you know, I want to plant some shiraz. They say, what shiraz clone do you want? I say, well, what's a clone?
Yeah.
So it's what shiraz. So we're just giving what the best thing is. And so by and large, we tend to plant whatever was available, and what tends to be about, and everyone says, oh, well, you know, 1654 clone, Penfolds clone, that's the best shiraz. So everyone planted the whole thing. So you finish up ultimately, potentially, with a monoculture, with very little diversity. So one of the things that we identified 10 or 15 years ago was let's have a look at some of the great old vines in this area, Shiraz, Grenache and Cape, and some Tara, but mainly Shiraz and Grenache. And the program's been pushed on with Shiraz, and saying let's observe over a number of years vineyards from which we've been making wines which have consistently made pretty good terps, and then within that block start looking at vines which show good vine architecture and nice bunches, loose bunches, then do some analysis and get sort of berry weights and berry sizes and all those sorts of things that we think are contributing towards a high quality wine outcome, and start marking up those vines, from which we then do a selection nasal. And so from that, we then, I even forget how many, we might have done 12, 15 selections, and we're able to plant them in a replicated trial on the one piece of dirt or on the one time, you know, so that we were able to make enough of those to do some small scale batch winemaking. And so that was part of that in the Seppeltsfield area. So we took these individual vines, propagated them up, and then planted them, and then over a period of 4 or 5 years we've been able to make some small batches of wine from those to start to look for either some consistencies or, you know, what other differences or whatever. And like all of these things, my view about all this stuff is not so much what is the best, but is a combination of these things going to give us potentially a better, more interesting outcome. Yeah. Just saying, oh, there's one pretty boy, and the rest aren't as good as that one. And but out of all of that, obviously, I think the nursery has now commercialised about 4 of these. So we said, well, look, consistently these 3 or 4 came up as being quite distinctive and showing some particular characteristics. And you know, we weren't in a position when no one's planting vineyards anyway to commercialise 15 of these things. So we've actually worked on a few to bulk them up a little bit, get a bit more planting material. Yeah. So when the next tranche of the development might take place, where people go back and say, oh shit, I wish I'd thought about this a bit more deeply before I planted that block, maybe I would have done things a bit differently. Maybe I would have thought more about what am I trying to achieve here, can I come up with a better outcome than just planting the first Shiraz that, you know, was available from the first nursery I went to. So that's the sort of the background concept. But one of the fascinating things and about this whole process is that some of the selections came from Eden Valley and some came from the Barossa Valley. And the trial was done all in the Barossa Valley at Seppeltsfield. And the bizarre outcome is, and I've looked at it for some time, because the bizarre outcome was that the wines made from vines that were grown in Eden Valley showed Eden Valley characteristics grown in the Barossa Valley. That might have been what I told you about when we had a chat. Yeah. And so and you think, well, we say that they taste high tone and more floral and more lifted because they're cooler in that space. We've taken that vine and put it in a warmer space, and they've given similar characteristics to what you'd expect from that area. We did have a bloke working for us here who's just recently got like a PhD in plant genetics or something like that, but he's gone down to Tassie. And Tim said that, you know, I might have this word quite right, but he said there was a thing sort of almost like transgenic mutation, that things can actually adapt to their environment, you know, almost chameleon-like, I suppose, and actually take on the characteristics of their environment, and that can actually stay with them for a period of time in a new environment. And it could well be that, you know, like breeding out of human or other species, that it might take time for that vine to actually start to look more like a Barossa Valley vine than it
It's
is.
interesting because the only real experiment I've seen with Australian clonal material in America was what was going on at Seven Peaks. And they had the Australian clone, which is a Chapoutier clone from the 50s. They got in some Bocas stuff from Thomas Creek with their nursery stuff, and they got some stuff from Penfolds. And I never had a chance to try them, but the people who know their stuff have tried it. Said that the Kalimna clone really showed Australian qualities and really stood out differently than the other two. And when you talk to a lot of growers when we planted a lot of source material for new vines and Shiraz, very few people use Aussie clones. Very little of it. And the winemakers themselves don't really understand that the type of Shiraz that's here. It's all pre-phylloxera and other different style. That's not known to them. And surprisingly, when you tell them that, they're not really curious about it. It's like I would think that grower is looking for something kind of very interesting clonally would be knocking on your door left and right for stuff like this.
And the other sort of adjunct to the story, you mentioned that the Kalimna wines, is that back in 2008 we started informally, at the time it's now become more formal, thing we've loosely called the Barossa Terroirs project, where we're committing to 5 years of examination of Shiraz grown in about 40 different sites around the valley, and these people, all these winemakers, are all committing to making the wine in its normal way, putting it into oldish French oak, so the oak doesn't influence the outcome too much, having an annual tasting, and we're trying to develop the vocabulary and seeing if we can, if there is a consistent trend about wines from Lindok versus wines from Gummersul versus wines from the Kalimna Sands or the Stockwell or whatever, showing different characteristics. Because in our very early tasting, we identified that. And the first tasting was we had 9 very loose regions, about 50 wines out of the 08 vintage. It was in conjunction with the Shiraz Alliance that year, and we had a day with a local wine media. And we just asked them to where the wines came from. We just go bracket, whiteboard, wrote down tasting comments, and then on that particular tasting, we started down south at Williamstown, Lindok, came up through the valley, went up into Eden Valley, then came through Vinevale, then hit sort of Stockwell, Kalimna, Greenock. And when we got to that sort of Stockwell area, they said, this is Barossa. The fact is, they've all been Barossa all the way through, but that was their interpretation of what a Barossa Shiraz was all about. And what, of course, part of the exercise is saying there is not just one Barossa. Barossa is not a monoculture, it's actually lots of different nooks and crannies and valleys and different aspects and those sorts of things. And so it was a fascinating exercise that we're hoping we can perpetuate to the extent where we can, if there is something we can actually measure, reasonably objectively, just to sort of try to define in the winemakers of the valley's views what one could normally expect if you're going to have a Shiraz from this place versus a Shiraz from that place, given there will be no absolutes. But it just gives people a pointer in the right direction.
That's where